Hi, Misha here, and on the table I have 5 rifles that will probably look identical to some people. These are all Japanese substitute type 99s, referred to as last stitch Arisakas, and these are all from 1945. So these are not the kind of technical last stitch, from 43. These are true into the war production guns when they were pretty much at full wartime features. And this isn't going to be a highly structured video. I did a Arisaka 101 kind of buyer's guide recently, and we were talking about last stitch said, it's late, it's raining out, I'm not ready to hit the hay yet, so I just frankly felt like throwing some last stitches on the table and just talking about the differences, maybe telling a story or two, just kind of a informal hangout, something like that. We'll see. On the bottom, I have a Nagoya. This is either series 10 or 11. That's one problem for me, is not being able to see the symbols and not always having someone to ask. But I'll get up on it for you here. Hopefully you can see it. But yeah, it's either 10 or 11. Quite late. Followed by Kokura Series 25. And then we have a Toyo Kogyo Series 35. Further up, we have a Tokyo Juki Kogyo Series 27. And then up here, and I will move these around, but then up here we have a Jensen, which is, yes, I know it's Incheon in Korea, but Jinsen is kind of the Japanese or Americanized Japanese version. Series 40, often referred to as a Jensen Special. And again, these are all pretty much the final versions. The Type 99 and Substitute 99 were made by basically 8 factories. And this represents 5 of them. It's worth pointing out that the Tokyo Juki made Series 27 under Nagoya supervision, and Series 37 under Kokura supervision. Toyo Kogyo also produced under under Kokura supervision, actually making several series. And for Nagoya, they had 2 small manufacturers, Howa and Izawa. They produced quite small numbers 40, 50,000 each under its supervision. So your two major factories that supervised were Nagoya and Kokura. And there are certain features that really just make a late war gun. So let's start from the butt. All of these have a butt plate made of wood nailed on to the stock. Most are held on with 3 nails, but some can be found with 2 nails. All have a rough cut stock. You'll have a larger recoil lug in a late war stock. You'll have a short upper handguard that ends right past the rear barrel band. Obviously you won't have a monopod, and you'll have a fixed welded rear sight. Actually, this sight pretty much mimics the battle sight on the regular 99 adjustable. Have the exposed barrel here. You will have a bayonet lug still, but this front band, which originally on the 99 had screws, is actually just pinned onto the barrel. You can see the pin, and then welded on the top. Moving from there, we have an unprotected front sight blade that is windage adjustable. And also, pretty much all of your late war guns have a rough undress weld, at least to one degree or another, safety in the back. And they will all have been made with the chrysanthemum, even though the Type 99 marking itself is usually gone. Kind of interestingly, a lot of the chrysanthemums are off-center, but they also seem to be very deeply struck. I don't know, they're just very bold. All of them have the 5-round magazine with hinged floor plate. But beyond that, we have lots of variations, because each factory instituted different economies at different times. Well, let's start with Nagoya. They originated the Type 99, beginning with the No series and running through Series 4. Actually, the first 10,000 in Series 4 were made by Izuwa, but otherwise, yeah, these are all the standard full 99s. Between Series 5 and 7, they're going through transitional. And then Series 8, 10, and 11 are full last ditch. With Series 12, only started at the tail end of the war, and only having about 1,000 members. Either way, Series 12 are exceedingly rare. Series 9, while it was under Nagoya's supervision, was actually split between Izuwa and Howa. Well, on these we have that, separate piece front handguard block. Typically, Nagoyas have pretty noticeable lathe marks on their barrels. You can even hear it. Have exposed welds on the barrel bands. The rear band is a simple, band that's welded at the bottom and has one screw running through it. We have a rear sight that has a little bit of dressing on the sides, but nothing crazy. The fuller grooves in the stock are gone. This one still has the dished trigger guard with the cutouts for the thumb behind it. Still has the groove for the dust cover, but it never had a dust cover, for sure. One thing that Nagoya kind of pioneered, and they were about the first to start using it, was this cylindrical bolt handle. Not only is it simpler to manufacture, it's actually longer to give a little bit better leverage because of the more awkward shape, the less ergonomic shape. Moving back, one thing that Nagoya did, and some others copied, the rear sling swivel, while it's still here, has only one screw. There's not even a place for a front one. Again, they saved a little bit of metal and they saved a screw. I guess, yeah. And then we're back to our wooden butt plate. Comparing that to the Kokura, and this is, like I said, a 25, so this is a last series Kokura, quite a late one. This particular gun has a little better machined barrel. A little bit cleaner welds on the barrel band. On the other hand, the rear sight doesn't have the dressing. It's just squared off on the corners. The receiver is very very rough. This particular one is missing a mum. No fuller grooves again. Notice we have some pretty gnarly chatter marks at the wrist of the stock. And this has the simplified trigger guard. There's no cutout in the back for finger groove. And it's just straight, it's not dished. So it's just a straight piece of metal. Even the floor plate is just more angular. On the other hand, it retains the 2-screw rear swivel, which Kokuras always had. They never went to the single. Likewise, Kokuras kept the plumb bolt knob, although of course it's more hastily machined, but they did not go to the cylindrical one. Moving on to our Toyo, another 35, late war. These are actually known for maybe being the nicer overall, kind of more consistent of the late war guns. The weld on the barrel band is very clean. It retains the fuller grooves in the stock. Still has a chrysanthemum. It too, like Kokura, keeps the plumb knob. but it has the straight trigger guard. Not near as much chatter around the wrist on this one, but it has the single screw rear swivel, even though the stock itself does look to be a little bit more polished. These are interesting for their location. They were produced at a factory quite near where the atomic bomb was dropped. Kokura is ranged from Series 20 through 25. And Toyo's range from Series 30 through 35. And they were produced under Kokura supervision. Well, I don't think you're missing a whole lot by not seeing me work the actions on these. It probably would have been of a bit of a jip to not show you the other sides, at least. So here is the Nagoya. You can see the weld on the barrel band. At least I hope you can. Here is the kind of weld on the underside of that barrel band. Very visible. Here's our cylindrical cocking knob. You can see the flat end. It's as basic as you can get. Like I said, it still has the groove and for your finger to go around the guard, and it's still indented. That's about it. As for our Kokura, we have some more lovely chatter marks. For some reason, the Kokuras have a lot of these on the wrist. I'm not sure why. Here's our plumb knob. But we can see it's definitely not as nicely machined as an early war, with this flat kind of spool left on the end. There's our very simple trigger guard. Simplified, squared off rear sight. A little bit cleaner weld on this one. But again, not a whole lot different to see on this side. And then for our Series 35, our Toyo, definitely a little smoother. It doesn't even have that flat place on the bolt handle. Although it would never have passed early war inspection. Very decent weld underneath. If there even is one. In the front. You can see the pin is very visible on this one for some reason. But yeah, those are the three largest manufacturers at the end of the war. And all of them were building substitute 99s until the surrender. But what about some of the smaller factories and lesser known ones? Both of these are about as late war gets, and are quite uncommon. The Tokyo Juki down here is from Series 27, and that's about all we know. there's not a lot to go on this rifle. For one, it's one of those built, turned out without a serial number. It does, of course, have the Royal Chrysanthemum, which was the royal family's mark. Cylindrical bolt knob. Interestingly, it does have the dished trigger guard still. Short upper handguard. And you'll notice the front barrel band has no swivel on it. Barrel actually has pretty good machining. Probably this barrel was a previously rejected barrel used later, or maybe it came off a damaged rifle. Welded front band, all pretty typical. But this is a so-called rope hole. Instead of having a sling swivel in the rear back here, we will literally have a hole for a rope drilled into the stock. You put a rope through it, you tied a knot on the other end so it couldn't come back through. You made kind of a noose with the other end of your rope, which you dropped over the muzzle and kind of tied around here. Literally carrying it with a rope. This is also one of the few late war ones that actually was made with the receiver that did not have grooves for the dust cover. Even though no late war gun came with a cover, most still had the groove for it, but not all. Like I said, this was produced for Series 27 under Nagoya supervision, and it's worth pointing out that some Series 11 and Series 12 from Nagoya themselves had similar features. No dust cover grooves and a rope hole in the back. There's also a variation that retains a front sling swivel that you can tie your rope around up here. And our other one, from the Jensen Arsenal in Korea, Incheon, is often called a Jinsen Special because it has its own unique features. It actually has the 2-screw rear swivel, so that's there. Straight trigger guard. Most unique, the takedown here has a large kind of thumb area recessed in it for disassembly, rather than the raised area you find on every other Type 99 or even Substitute 99. This has a cylindrical cocking handle. It actually was welded on slightly crooked, and it's serialized in a different direction and very sloppily compared to the others, which is interesting. Also, the rear sight is located differently. It's on a different, shorter block and located at the front of that block versus on other Substitute 99s where it's usually at the rear and on a longer block. This one too does not have the grooves for the dust cover. And no mum on this one, but it's a matching Jensen, so I'm not complaining. Our rear barrel band is a little unique. It's a wide band, and it even has kind of the earlier style top, but it's very crudely shaped and very roughly welded at the bottom. The barrel itself shows a considerable stepping and lathe marks too. And then our front barrel band, which is really what makes these kind of the number one feature to make a Jinsen Special, is this front band, which has a flat top. And what that basically really is just they took a straight piece of steel and just welded it on the top on both sides. Very crude, very chunky front band, but very unique for collectors, I'll give it that. Jinsen would make over 93,000 and under 93 to 94,000 range. So they didn't quite finish one full series, so they never got outside of their original Series 40. They were in occupied Korea. There was also Mukden in occupied China, who made a number of Type 38s, but only made about 3,000 Type 99s during the war. So Chinese Mukdens are quite rare, as you can imagine. And of course, gotta flip these over. Wouldn't be fair not to let them show their other sides too. You see, the hole kind of goes straight through. Tokyo Juki had some really interesting variations, especially in the transitional area. This one actually has a pretty decently welded safety for late war. In fact, the whole gun has a pretty decent finish compared to some of the others, but yeah, roll pull. And no grooves and no serial number. And how much of a hurry do you have to be in? In the Jensen. Very lumpy stock on this side. There's our cylindrical handle. Like I said, it's very hastily done. It may have the most gnarly welds of any of them on the bottom of the barrel band. If you look here, and that's pretty incredible. Yeah, these late Jensens can be quite interesting and rough. There's our flat top band. So they made it this far. Man, they give any stories. Like I said, some of you see have mums, some you don't. My kind of personal opinion, I mean, definitely everything equal, you'll take the one with the mum. But on some guns like the Jensen, you don't ignore something like this just because it doesn't have a mum. And actually, on the Kokura of is that my Kokura? Yeah. I went with it over one that had a mum just because I kind of liked it more. You know? On the other hand, I had a rope hole with no mum at all, and I picked this one. I think the missing mum is every bit as part of the history from World War II as the mum. I would say no collection is complete unless you have mums and don't have mums. And it's really interesting that the early mums are relatively evenly struck, but not all that deep. Late war mums can be kind of struck off-center, but they tend to be very large, very deep, which means if they go to grind them off at surrender, oftentimes they had to grind down pretty far. Just kind of observation. Whereas the mum thing, I can live with or without. One aspect I really need with my Arisakas is matching serial numbers. The only exceptions are exceedingly rare guns, and there are some guns that just don't match. For example, this Tokyo Juki, the bolt has a number, but since the serial isn't even on the receiver, it was probably just a random bolt they picked up and used. There are some internal differences. There's a little bit of difference in how the bolts are made. One interesting thing, they actually went to a shorter striker spring, firing pin spring, towards the end of the war. Save a little metal. And as is quite famously known, they quit chrome plating the bores late in production. But you might be surprised how late they did keep chrome lining bores. And even very late guns can sometimes show up with chrome line barrels if they're using an older, salvaged, or previously rejected barrel. Just saying. Oh, one other thing I didn't point out. If you notice on these, you've got this kind of socket here around the screw hole. Some guns, it seems to be less common, but, it is a factor. Trying to knock it too much. There are some that just have a simple screw sticking out, no socket or adornment around it. Minor little variation. But see, that's the kind of stuff I find interesting. Just the little differences. How they each save money and time the best they could. Some of these I just acquired. My first last ditch was actually a Kokura Series 25. But it's not this one. This one is an upgrade I picked up later. It was a little bit of a later gun. This one is, and just a little bit of condition. My original one had a bit of a crack on the stock. That's the one I've told the story for. That a pawn shop essentially just gave me some 20 years ago, with the only caveat being that I promised not to shoot it. Because back then, people were sincerely worried that last-ditch rifles would blow up. And I don't want to go too deep into that today, but, just based on the appearance, you can't blame them, and this is really before the internet and everything. And some have blown up, but really at no greater ratio than other old guns blowing up. The truth is, the receiver, the bolt, the barrel were as durable and safe as about anything else. It's just the outside was rough. The Series 35 came from a friend a couple years ago. I realized I had a Kokura. I actually had a couple in Nagoyas, and it was a bit of a hard time for me to pick which to keep. I had a really nice late Series 11, but no mum. But, so I had the Nagoya, the Kokura, and I told him, I'd like to have one from Toyo, just to have one from each of the three big ones. And so he sent me this one, and I think he wanted $250 for it or something. You know, it's a good, clean, honest example with the mom and matching, so very fair deal. The Jinsen came about through a different friend. It was in a big box of guns, and he wanted a set price for all of them. Now, keep in mind, I was buying like 50 Arisakas that day from him, and I'd already sold or bought others before from him, probably over 100 in total. But he wanted, originally he said he wanted 125 per gun, and I said, no, I'll at least do 150 per gun. Which kind of sounds like I'm being a skinflint, but keep in mind, some of the guns have been sporterized. Not many, but a couple. Some are missing parts. Again, not many, but a couple. You know, so some had issues. And when you're buying that many guns, you do have to get a bit of a deal. I didn't know this Jensen was in it till later, when I really went through them all. And even then, when I knew that, at first I didn't think it was matching because of how weird the serial is written on the bolt. Once I did find out what it was, I called him and told him, offered to give him more. But he didn't. Yeah, he didn't want anything. So obviously I was going to keep it for that. So I'm grateful for that. Same guy that I got my Type 2 from. I had a Type 2 before that, but the one I got for him was just nicer. So that's how I got my Jinsen. And the rope hole, it might have come from the same guy. I've had 3 or 4 rope holes over the years, so they start to run together. I had this, and I had a Series 11 Nagoya rope hole, which I believe I showed you in another video. But when this one came along with, intact mum and the interesting receiver without serial or dust cover grooves, I had to go for this one. It's just an interesting example. So that gave me a Tokyo. So I kind of ended up with one from the, more gettable ones. I've had opportunities to have an Izawa, even a Hawa. But, they do have their variations, but at the end of the day, in my line of work, as much as I do love guns, I have to be mindful that I've got to turn a profit, and I can't keep everything. And feature-wise, which is really what I appreciate, are features, they were about the same. And I've never had a Mukden. So, not bad. Of the 8, 7 are gettable, and of the 7, over the years, 20 years plus of doing these, I picked up 5. So I'm very content. I think this is a good spread. And I also like guns like this because, thanks to Japanese guns, I've met a lot of good people, made some sincere friendships. At one time, it was a very tight-knit community because Japanese guns were a very niche collectible. People just didn't think much of them. Which is a shame because the majority in America are true vet bringbacks, and the majority haven't been refurbished or refinished. I mean, try to find a non-refurbished military. M1 Carbine or Mosin Nagant or Enfield. Most of the guns of the Allies, the victors in the war, were kept in service and refurbished at some point, which is perfectly fine. But these Japanese guns are as they were picked up off the battlefield, or in some cases, especially with late war guns that maybe never left the home islands, taken straight out of the crate at the factory. It's possible, quite easily, honestly, to get a Japanese gun, last ditch especially, that was never issued, which is pretty neat. A lot of these you can find original grease in the barrels and bolts and magazines because they were produced, but because Japan's supply lines were so badly devastated towards the end of the war in 1945 when these rifles were made. They made them, but they couldn't get them anywhere where they could be of use. Plus, by that point, they were already stocking up preparing to fight the invasion of the islands, which of course never happened because of the atomic bombs. But yeah, each of these has history. And whereas a lot of manufacturing from America, Britain, Russia was mass scale and very, what am I trying to say, standardized. Each Japanese arsenal kind of did its own thing. And you can see signs of a lot of hand-fitting, and towards the end of the war, a lot of ingenuity to make leftover, rejected, reclaimed parts work. So a lot of parts were fitted together that maybe weren't originally meant to be put together, but, you know, they did what they had to do to make a functioning rifle. So yeah, that's just why I really enjoy them. 1 million so-called last-ditch, aka substitute 99s, were made. So, yeah. Quite a few between 1944 and 1945. And I'm very happy that these are starting to get recognition and appreciation, because the Krieg models from Germany for the Mausers, people like. But the Arisakas, especially the last ditches, were just kind of overlooked. It seems like in the past, when a person wanted an Arisaka, they wanted an early war with monopod and AA sights and mum and all that, which is, I admit, is super cool. But they often overlook the last ditch, which, I mean, I have 5 last ditches here. When it comes to early war guns, I have a long rifle with monopod, and I have a short rifle with monopod. That's it. Because there's not a lot of variation. As it goes on, you get more and more variation, and like I said, that's what I really enjoy, because, hell, it's not like I can see the series markings. But yeah, like I said, this is just a very informal chat, hangout, and a rainy old night here. Hope it wasn't too boring. I appreciate you staying with me. I'd love to hear about your Arisakas, or really anything else you feel like talking about, because old military stuff, Milsurp, CNR, is just cool. And with that said, I invite you to comment below, and if you could, like, share, and subscribe as always. And also, if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to our Patreon page. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.